Hello, welcome back. This is our fourth lesson of the semester, and it is about ideologies developed in the 19th century. We are going to look into a few of those ideologies. But before we start, I would like to make a summary of what we have studied so far. We started the semester with the scientific revolution, which happened during the 16th and 17th centuries. At the same time that the scientific revolution is happening, there is another important event related to the Europeans, and that was the European expansion into other parts of the world. It is during this time that what is called the New World was found and conquered by the Europeans, and it is also during this time that other parts of the world were settled and at least visited by the Europeans. The world became a playground for the Europeans. Then came the next century, the 18th century, and during that time the most important development in Europe was the intellectual movement of the Enlightenment, which was our second lesson. And then from that second lesson we went to our third lesson, which was the study of the French Revolution and Napoleon and the American Revolution. And all of that happened during the 18th century. If you look at those dates, happened at the end of the 18th century. But another important event that we did not mention yet was the Industrial Revolution, which was happening at the same time that the American Revolution and the French Revolution and the Napoleonic years were going on. And the Industrial Revolution was as significant as any of the other events that we have studied. We ended lesson 3 with the fall of Napoleon. Therefore, the next chronological period is going to be the period after Napoleon. And during that time, the most important happening was the peace settlement that came after the fall of Napoleon, and something called the Congress of Vienna that is part of this lesson. Scientific revolution, together with European expansion. The Enlightenment, together with the Industrial Revolution. And the three major events that resulted from the Enlightenment: the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and the Napoleonic period. And after the fall of Napoleon, the peace settlement and the Congress of Vienna. Each of these events that we have mentioned produced an ideology that we are going to be discussing during this lesson. I will give you the introduction to those ideologies, and then I will let you look into the details of each of the ideologies and who proposed each of the ideologies. Let's analyze, for instance, Darwinism is one of the ideologies to study this lesson, and this ideology is an immediate result of the scientific revolution. Then came the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment produced two ideologies. One is liberalism that we mentioned already. All the ideas of the Enlightenment together produced the ideology called liberalism. And then there was a reaction against the Enlightenment, a reaction against the emphasis that the Enlightenment placed on rationalism. So the Romanticism is very much a movement that focused on all those things that the Enlightenment did not focus on feelings, on emotions, on instinct, on imagination. Then came the Industrial Revolution, and with the Industrial Revolution came an expansion of industries, of manufacturing, and with that the beginning of factories. And with the beginning of factories, the beginning of a new labor force that was working in the factories. And because of that new situation, a new ideology was born, and that is the ideology of socialism. Those socialists were so concerned with the conditions in which the workers lived and worked that they were looking for ways to alleviate the suffering of the workers, and they came up with different ideas. These first socialists are called utopian socialists, and one of the persons who called them that was Karl Marx, who was also a socialist, but he criticized the early socialists, and he thought they were too naive, too utopian, and he proposed new theories that would give not only help to the workers but power to the workers. Most historians would agree that the modern idea of nationalism started when the French Revolution was faced with an attack from foreign powers. The revolutionary government then called the people of France to defend their land. And this was the first time in Europe that an army was formed by people who volunteered to serve not a king or a lord, but their nation. And this was the beginning of what we call nationalism. For that reason, historians claim that nationalism began in France during the French Revolution. However, Napoleon, who started to conquer other nations, made the people of the other nations react against him and France. And in that way, the people of the other nations felt strong desire to defend their land against Napoleon. And that was the beginning of the spread of nationalism to other parts of Europe. For those two reasons, historians say that nationalism began in France during the French Revolution and then was spread by Napoleon to other parts of Europe. Finally, we get to the end and fall of Napoleon. Napoleon was defeated, and the other powers in Europe got together to decide how they were going to organize the government and the countries in Europe after the threat of Napoleon was gone. And the reason why they felt that they needed to do that was because those ideas of the French Revolution that had been spread by Napoleon were considered evil and bad. They wanted to make a parenthesis and go back to the old traditions that had existed before the French Revolution. The result of that is the ideology of conservatism. What we have here is a list of ideologies, and these are the ideologies that I'm going to ask you to look into, and not only to look into the ideas in general of the specific ideology, but who are the representatives and what they said. The rest of the introduction to this lesson, we will spend looking into some of these ideologies that we have mentioned. We will start with the ideology of liberalism. And remember, liberalism as an ideology was produced by the Enlightenment. But in general, as an attitude, liberalism means acceptance to new ideas. The people who accepted the ideas of the Enlightenment and the French Revolution and Napoleon were people who were open to those new ideas, who were ready to accept change. And that is what the ideology itself brings, openness to change. Now, the name of liberalism implies liberty, and liberty was one of the features of liberalism. Specifically, the liberals in the 19th century accepted the ideas of the Enlightenment, meaning all the freedoms that we discussed before, and also the idea of a representative government. And they did not want the idea of a monarchy unless the monarchy was limited and the people had representation. The ideology of conservatism implied the rejection to or fear of change. So the key word would be preservation, would be let's go back to the way things were before all these new ideas came. The 19th century conservatives then rejected the ideas of freedom of the Enlightenment and rejected a representative government. They wanted to go back to monarchy, and not only to monarchy, but to absolute monarchy. So we then have these two opposing views, conservatism versus liberalism. An idea that is very important to analyze is the idea of nation. Nation was not always a concept that existed in history. The idea of nation started recently, and that idea in many ways also started during the late 18th century and gave origin to the ideology of nationalism. So what is nationalism? Nationalism is very much the same as patriotism, and anybody would tell you that patriotism means the love to the country. The word patrie is the French word for nation, and that's the origin of patriotism. The other aspect of nationalism is being aware that you are part of a community of people. And usually it is a community that has similar background and similar features. It could be, for instance, a similar language, or it could be similar religion, or it could be a similar ethnicity. But sometimes it's not even that. Sometimes you can have in a community people with different backgrounds, with different languages, and all of them feel part of that community, and that would be also nationalism. Notice that nationalism is a feeling, I feel strongly love for my community or for my country. There are many benefits of the ideology of nationalism, and it also has a few drawbacks. Some of the benefits, for instance, that we could name are the feeling of unity. I feel united to the other people who share the same nation. The feeling that my nation achieved this. My nation is superior to other nations. That is, and it's again is the feeling of pride in one's nation. And all those we could say that are advantages of the ideology. Another one that could be used in a positive way or in a negative way, politicians use that love for the country to make people do certain things or to make people accept certain things, and they use rhetoric to do that. We need to defend our country, we need to make our country better, and all those slogans that politicians can use, taking advantage of those feelings of pride that people have. There are some other advantages. For instance, when there is a common enemy, the people feel united. We are going to fight the enemy, and that feeling of unity is very strong, especially when there is an enemy. The one problem that could happen when there is a feeling of nationalism, and that happened at the beginning of World War I, it is the division that is created by strong feeling of nationalism, and it makes the we-they is a separation of we against they. We are good, they are bad. We are superior, they are inferior. We are better, they are worse. And this we-they feeling can and has caused many wars and many conflicts in the history of Western civilization. Again, its origin, according to some historians, is the French Revolution or Napoleon. In the United States, nationalism has played a very strong role. Here is a very beautiful painting that represents manifest destiny. This figure is called Columbia, and she is floating here, moving across the land, and here in the background you see the settlers. And as Columbia moves forward, you see how light replaces darkness, and where there was ignorance before, there is going to be civilization later. The concept of manifest destiny was coined by a reporter called John O'Sullivan, and this is the first time that the term was used. It is our manifest destiny to overspread and to possess the whole of the continent which Providence has given us. Now, notice that Providence meaning God, so God has given us this land that is for us to take. And because of that feeling that we have the divine right to take that land, we are going to do it. And that was the motor behind the expansion to the west. The growth of the United States was produced by this feeling of manifest destiny. Darwinism could be considered an ideology. What it is, the reason why Darwin historically is important in the 19th century is because he is a very good example of how the scientific method was applied. If you remember the story of Darwin and his voyage and how he started finding all these new species of finches and how he analyzed them, and he spent about 3 years in the voyage, and then he was observing all these different species that he found in the Galapagos Island, and then he went back to England and he spent about 30 years writing and doing the research and then writing his books. He claimed, and that's one of the reasons why he is looked at as an example of the scientific method, he claims that he used the inductive method proposed by Francis Bacon. There are studies that show that in reality he did not use only the inductive method, that he used both inductive and deductive. But in whatever it was first, inductive or deductive, the fact is that he did use what today is called the scientific method. And he was so influential that even today there are many fields of science that use his proposals. Another ideology that has been very, very popular, especially among people who speak German or English, is called social Darwinism. This is not a result of Darwin's biological theories, but this was the application of Darwin's ideas to other aspects of society that are not purely biological. And there are two very important proponents of social Darwinism, and there is a document in this lesson that I'm going to ask you to please read and analyze to understand all the consequences of social Darwinism. And again, just like nationalism, many people feel like a social Darwinist even though they don't even know that there is such an ideology. And many people at the same time are aware that social Darwinism is still alive and is the driving force of many actions by many people. The next set of ideologies are early socialism, that is also called utopian socialism, and Marxism. Utopian socialists were those who lived during the first part of the 19th century, and they became aware of those pitiful conditions that existed among the workers, and they wanted to help the workers. There are several socialists. Each of them had different ideas about how to solve the problem, and they made different proposals, and some of them implemented their ideas. All of them with the idea that competition was leading to a very unfair society, unjust society, and that the solution was cooperation instead of competition. And they all were idealistic, and they wanted to create a happy society, and that's why they are called utopian socialists. Karl Marx lived a few years after the utopian socialists, and he was also a socialist, but he took the ideas of socialism much further. Marx is an amazing intellectual, historical figure. He has contributions in economics, in sociology, in all fields, in philosophy certainly. But the most important thing for our lesson is that Marx was not happy with the idea of helping the workers. Marx thought that the conditions of the workers were such that the workers at some point were not going to put up with those conditions, and they themselves were going to react, and they were going to produce a new society. All the workers in the world united. They were going to have what is called the proletarian revolution, and they were going to revolt against the oppression, and they were going to create a society without classes. And with this, we end lesson 4, and now it's your turn to study the lesson and then prepare for the first exam of the semester.